Welcome to Next Gen VC, a podcast from Gen Zs to Gen Zs. We aim to be the transparent window into the mysterious world of VCs and startups through the authentic conversations with the very individuals that make them. In today's episode, we're joined by Jan, an early-stage investor at IRIS based in Berlin. Jan has spent a number of years in his early 20s working in VC and with startups, and was also part of the founding team of Innovators Room. Jan speaks about why he strongly believes that working on side projects is the best way to differentiate oneself when applying to a VC fund, and also touches on the German startup ecosystem. If you enjoy our content, do support us by hitting the follow button and give us a follow on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram at NextGenVCPod for updates on the latest episodes. Are you tired of always hearing about Silicon Valley VCs and not knowing what the greats of European VC are thinking? Well, no more. Head over to theeuropeanvc.com, the go-to place for everything European VC. You'll find podcasts, events, and expert-curated content from all over the EUVC scene. Well, what are you waiting for? Go to theeuropeanvc.com now.
Hi, and thanks so much for joining us today, Jan. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Ready and excited for the weekend. It's going to come up soon. And thank you for having me. So excited to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on the podcast. And to start off, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you do, and how you ended up in venture?
So Jan, my name, as you all know, investor here at IRIS, based in Berlin. I'm pretty much covering our early stage activities for the DACH, that means Germany, Austria, and Switzerland market here at IRIS. And for us, early stage is really focusing on seed to Series A, because at IRIS, we are a firm that invests not only in the early, but also in late stages, so quite stage agnostic, as we say, and also actually investing not only in the DACH area, but in France and across Europe. So truly a pan-European venture firm. And I'm fortunate to kind of be in the role of supporting the team and kind of being in charge of sourcing opportunities here in the DACH area and based in Berlin. And I think how I ended in venture is, I think, as with most careers in this industry, quite, a coincidence even, because to be frank, I never dreamed as a kid to be a venture capitalist. I mean, I guess nobody as a kid wants to be a VC, right? I always wanted to be a pilot growing up, and maybe more on that later, because this was a dream I had for the longest time. Actually, even when I finished high school, didn't even think about going to uni because I was so keen on being a pilot and going to pilot school. But then, through many coincidences, one of which was that I was fortunate to do an internship at an HR tech startup, also here in Berlin, when I was still in high school. And so I already had touch points with VC and the ecosystem while being a student. And so I started creating my own network, learning about the industry. And so actually for some weird reason, I was naive and I was 18. I remember this. And I think I texted my mom and I said, the internship's going great. And I had the meeting today with some VCs, and I think she didn't even know what a VC is. And I didn't know it either. And I said, this seems like a fun job. So maybe this would be something I would like to do. And ever since, I kind of had this notion, if this pilot thing doesn't work out and I go to uni and I study, maybe becoming a VC could be an option. And then I kind of pursued that, did my first internship at a VC firm, also here in Berlin, which was actually an investor in the startup I worked at. And then the rest is history. So that's kind of how I ended up in this industry. A lot of coincidences along the way. And as I said, it was never the dream job for me until I actually started being a VC. And I realized how much fun it is to work in this industry. Yeah.
It's amazing to hear that you started thinking about networking and internships even before university. And we'll come back to that, but we really want to understand. So you went to North Carolina State University in the US. So what made you decide to come back to Germany?
So it's true. I was actually studying in the US for 2 years. Prior to that, also in Germany. So I was really fortunate as well to be part of a dual degree program where I studied in Germany and the US to kind of compare, of course, once again, the two countries, but also actually I also worked in the US during my studies, so I could even compare the two ecosystems. So I also worked in the New York startup ecosystem for some time. And back in the day, I remember I wasn't so sure if I wanted to stay in the US or come back. In the end, I had to decide, right, whether I wanted to become a full-time investor or work in a startup. And I was kind of keen to actually come back to Europe being an investor in Europe. And because I saw that back in the time, that was around 2019, 2020, a lot of things were happening already in the German and European ecosystem. It was picking up pace. And I was able to kind of leverage my network here as well, here in Berlin, and was offered a job before I finished my studies. So I actually had this offer on the table, and I was just too good to pass. After 2 years in the US, I just wanted to be back, with friends and family, just be closer again. Living in the same time zone helps when you want to organize private stuff. So that was one of the reasons. And then what I didn't plan ahead, but I think which would have also made a stay in the US quite hard, COVID hit, right? So I decided to move back to Germany already before COVID was a thing back then, but just nobody knew about it just yet. And then, of course, COVID, the pandemic broke out. Hence, I actually moved back to Germany in the middle of the pandemic. So I think it would have been another reason, but it wasn't calculated. So that was a coincidence.
So what was so cool about this job that you ditched your entire plan to become a pilot?
So as I said, I kind of entered this internship while I was still in school, and I was sure to be a pilot. Everybody who I spoke to kind of told me, Jan, before you go to pilot school, get a degree. Because that way, if you become a pilot and you become unfit to fly, as they say, so you just can't work anymore as a pilot, you still have like a fallback to go to where you have a degree. And so I said, okay, studying sounds like a plan. And I was looking for something more generalist. So naturally business is, I would say, a very generalist study. Can never hurt a business degree, I thought to myself. And before I went into this uni, I wanted to gain some practical experience, and hence the startup. I'm not going to go into this because it's also like a whole story of coincidences how I ended up in the startup. But I thought, hey, working in a startup could be fun. What I realized really, really early on when I walked to the startup, but also then in my first VC internship, is how many people you meet along the way who are not only extremely smart, but also so intrinsically motivated, right? So as a kid, you talk to adults, you always, get this sense of, they have no time for anything. They just work, right? I remember speaking to friends of my parents, family friends who were doctors, lawyers, who all told me about their great careers, how much money they make in this job. Oh, I would do this because of the money. And I had the sense that people who started businesses, I remember talking to founders who, not all of them were successful, many of them failed, right? They were like, well, Jan, I started the first company, it failed, and guess what? I started my second company and it failed again, and I would still do it all the time, right? So the people, they would do it because they were so convinced of what they were doing. They loved, this entrepreneurial drive. They loved what they were doing. For me as a kid back in the day, it just seemed like people were so happy, and I mean, they all had crazy stories to tell, and they were actually living life to its fullest. And I think that was kind of what initially drew me into this ecosystem. But as I said, in the end, I met so many people who were extremely smart, who I could learn from. My learning curve was extremely high, and I was always very generalist in my interests, right? So already in school, I could not decide whether I love biology, history, or English class, like literature more. And in the job as a VC, I'm able to actually use a lot of different skills. Actually, it's not just a finance job. It's not just, a marketing job. It's a lot, not just sales. It's a lot of everything, maybe more on that later. So in the end, I loved it. I thought that I was being challenged, or that I was actually able to use all the skills that I've collected over the time. And I think there's not many jobs who challenge you in that in so many different ways, actually.
And they always say being a VC, no day is the same. And the German ecosystem is booming like crazy currently. Could you tell our listeners a bit more about, the German ecosystem, what you're excited about in the next couple of years, and why you've stayed there since you got your job in the startup and VC world?
So I think about the German ecosystem, it really picked up pace, as you said, just recently, right? So it lagged behind, I would say, the US, and it still lags behind the US. Let's be real here in funding. It's definitely picking up pace. And you see a lot of now, I would say, great talent, not only moving to Germany. So I think this is changing now, but also staying here in Germany, and it's evolving, right? So I would say now with the first wave of really big companies, that's created not a lot of only wealth, but also a lot of talent out there. So now you see founders who, have worked at Delivery Hero, for example, or at the Salonis, all unicorns now in Germany, and are spinning out of there and creating their own companies. So it's becoming this flywheel of successful early employees of big tech companies kind of like Silicon Valley, back in the 90s or early 2000s, now, who have learned, who have acquired skills, now breaking out, building their own companies. You also now have actually a strong backbone, especially of early stage funding. So there's now a lot of funds here in Germany. So if you compare it to like 10, 12, 15 years ago, there were only a handful of VCs, and most of them weren't even in Berlin, but they were actually in Munich or in Hamburg. But now you actually have a lot of VCs here in Berlin. With early stage funding is happening. So I would say the ecosystem is becoming self-sustaining in a certain way. What's still lacking, in my opinion, is definitely the fact that late stage funding is still dominated by mainly UK and US funds. So if you look at late stage rounds, most of them are being led by outside funds, just because there aren't that many late stage VCs here in Germany who cover this gap between early stage venture and then growth and private equity. But yeah, exciting for me was, as I said, the fact that it's becoming so self-sustaining, that there is so much talent now moving here to Germany from all over the world. But at the same time, also the local talent is, I would say, is incredible. And at the same time, you have a really good environment, especially in the B2B segment. So in Germany, the economy is dominated pretty much by industrial SME companies. It's a very it's a good environment for B2B startups to kind of be created here, because you actually create a company very close to the ones that you're selling to in the end. So it's a strong economy. At the same time now, I would say we are finally creating the sense of momentum where people are brave enough to not go the traditional ways anymore. If you look at people who I studied with, I would say 10, 15, 20 years ago, most of them would have probably gone into maybe consulting, banking, or, the industry, go to big corporates like a Bosch or Siemens. But now you see many people actually either funding their own companies or joining young companies, joining tech companies. And this is, I think, exciting. It's not just in Germany. I see the same thing in France, for example. It's happening in Germany as well. So the ecosystem is becoming much more mature and self-sustaining in a certain way.
It's interesting you mentioned that there's the biggest problem is there's a lack of a kind of like later stage funding in Germany, because I was just speaking to a couple of angels in Malaysia earlier today, and they said the exact same thing. Like once a company hits Series B, they probably have to go to Singapore or go to like a US fund to fundraise. So if you could speak to an LP right now who is deciding where they wanted to start their next late stage fund, what would you tell them to persuade them and to say, why Germany? What's so special about Germany?
Right. Now, I think in Germany now you actually finally we're at the point here where you have sufficient late stage opportunities to actually invest here, right? So as I said, the ecosystem picked up pace. A lot of good companies were created. A lot of them have now, gotten good funding. You see the second wave now of unicorns, think of Personio, for example, and there's so many more to come. So I think if you look at how many opportunities there are here in Germany, honestly, it would be for me a no-brainer to invest more here. And I think also at the same time, many European founders actually want to raise also now from European funds, right? So it's really about like capturing the value that's being created here in Europe and generating value also, with European funds, with European money, with funds that have like this really like European footprint in their DNA.
Got it. And changing gears a little bit, I know you talk a lot about this in a lot of German podcasts, but unfortunately, a lot of us can't listen to what you say. So you broke into VC very early into your career. What is it you think that made you stand out?
That's a great question, and it's right. Actually, I have talked about this before, and I think it's so good to be able to speak about this with you two, and also share it, in English, actually, so people who don't speak German can listen to this. And I think my advice is very clear and it's very straightforward. I always say, and I will repeat this on here now, to stand out, you have to think a bit outside the box. I think that's obvious, but how do you do that? And I personally believe that really projects are the better degrees. So what this means is that, I think most of the people who want to go into VC, they have really good grades. They do, amazing internships, and it's all really important, right? So I think to break into VC, of course, you should go do something cool as in study, get good grades, get some work experience in a startup or another VC or work, wherever you seem fit. But many people do that. So what I think what is really important, what helped me a lot personally was that I did actually some things on the side. I started my own little projects, and one of which I was fortunate to be part of is Innovators Room, a community I co-founded back in the day, which we also pivoted a few times, but is now basically a Slack community. I think we have more than 7,000 members now globally of people who are interested in the startup ecosystem, who are investors, who are founders, and who share learnings, resources, insights on the community. And it helped me not only to be, of course, associated with it, because this actually elevates, your branding in a certain sense. I think you always want to have a brand that as a VC, or even if you want to break into VC, you want to be a person that's known for something. But furthermore, it helped me actually network. So I was living in the US, studying in North Carolina, which is pretty far away from the European, startup industry and ecosystem. And through Innovators Room, I was actually able to not only foster and nurture my network, but actually meet new people. And if I can give one advice, to maybe somebody who's listening to this wants to break into VC, do something to stand out. It doesn't have to be a community. It could be a podcast, like, for example, you two are doing. It could be, a local club at your university, like a VC club, like a startup club. You could organize maybe your own event. I actually just spoke at a conference in Frankfurt organized by students at the local university because they said there's so little happening in the local startup ecosystem that they wanted to host their own conference. So doing something like this really helps you stand out. And why? Because it also demonstrates that you have this drive. You are actually intrinsically motivated and you are somewhat entrepreneurial, which I think is an important skill. If you want to be a VC, you obviously want to develop some of your entrepreneurial skills yourself to not only be empathetic with founders you talk to, but also really understand what it takes to start your own venture or project, So this was for me, I think, something that made me stand out back in the day. And I can only encourage everybody who listens to this to do something that they are interested in doing. Don't force yourself, obviously. It should be something, because you're going to spend a lot of time on these projects on top of what you're actually doing in uni or in your internships. To do something that you like, but at the same time, do something, because this will actually, in the end, impress, I would say, the funds you're going to talk to.
That's definitely some great advice. And on Innovators Room, could you tell us a bit more about how it came about that you joined them, and what was that experience like, and how has it shaped you to be kind of a better VC today?
That's a great question. It was also, once again, a random coincidence, I would say. Back in the day, Stefan, who actually is one of the people I did Innovators Room with, he's also a former VC, and he has this very, very popular European tech and VC job newsletter. He was looking for somebody to kind of support him with that remotely, and I was introduced to him. And through that, we got to know each other. We worked on this newsletter, and then we developed the idea of Innovators Room, which honestly, it wasn't the idea originally. As I said, we pivoted it a few times, wasn't to create this community. Actually, the reason why it's called Innovators Room was actually we wanted to create a platform on Instagram back in the day on corporate innovation news. So kind of become the leading social media outlet on the corporate innovation news. So cover, what fields corporate and venture funds are investing in, connect people from the industry and shed some light, because we thought, that could be an interesting space. We also had to learn that, once again, creating content doesn't really scale. It's a lot of work. At the same time, not too many people actually cared about what we were doing. So we kind of just dumped all our contacts into our internal Slack. So the Slack Innovators Room was actually our internal communication tool from the Innovators Room founding team back in the day. We dumped all our friends and contacts in there. And then it just organically grew. And it grew super fast. We then decided to actually post the jobs we would actually publish in our newsletter in a live Slack feed. So actually we had this, I would say, pull factor of being kind of the source of VC job postings. So many people signed up just to have this access to these jobs, and the rest is history. People invited their friends, and it just grew. COVID hit. People were looking actually for online ways of connecting and networking and meeting people. That's kind of how Innovators Room was created.
That's amazing. And something you mentioned that was super interesting was that you pivoted. And I think this is something that a lot of people who want to start something think about. It's there's a million things I can do. I can do a podcast. I can write a newsletter. How do you think people should go about thinking what they should do? And also, when should they decide, if a certain project is not worth putting time and effort into anymore?
I think, as I said, it's really important that you do something that you enjoy, that you love, right? So for me, connecting people Networking has always been something I just liked. I organized parties, in my private life, and I still do this from time to time, right? But I also love to organize these networking events. I still do this here in Berlin. So for me, it was really like a no-brainer to do something I care about, that I like. Another friend of mine, for example, he started writing about crypto because he really liked the space and he really just enjoyed it. And he was doing the research for himself and thought, hey, I can actually just publish it, so maybe some people find it helpful. And he was recruited as a VC from uni because this VC was actually subscribing to his crypto newsletter and reading on his blog. So once again, he did something he loved. He didn't do it for a particular reason, just other than he was interested in it. I would say with Innovators Room, as I said, we pivoted because we learned also that people didn't really care about it. So if you have a certain goal with it and you want to have like a big reach, for example, then you should definitely see and check if that what you're doing is actually creating some value for people. And if the answer is no, then there might be a good indicator to actually change what you're doing. On the other hand, I would say get some people to do it with maybe, so like maybe make it fun, make it even social. And that could also be fun. And then and for us, the Innovators Room, it was very much like a group effort. So like the three of us, Leon, Stefan, and I, we of course ideated a lot, talked about like how much impact we create with this. Is the value real? We did a lot of user interviews actually. So we talked to people and said, hey, what do you think Innovators Room as a platform should be? What value would it give to you? And if the answer would have been, guys, there's literally no value out of this, stop doing it, then maybe we would have stopped doing this, right? So I would say talk to people, engage with people, gather the feedback needed to actually decide whether or not it's worth your time and effort.
And I wanted to shift gears a bit now because, we've spoken a bit about like how to differentiate yourself trying to break into VC, but a lot of people don't actually fully understand what being a VC involves. So could you tell us a bit more about actually like what your day-to-day is like at IRS, especially at the stage you're at in your career?
It's a great question, and it's a question actually I get a lot because I would say it is very intransparent for many what VCs actually do. And as you said, nowadays VCs are alike, and that's true. My days are very different. On some days I talk to founders a lot. I would either talk to them via Zoom or Google Meets, so like online meetings, or I would meet them for a coffee. I would go to a lunch with a founder. I would also talk to other VCs. There's a lot to talk to other investors, on market trends and opportunities, some of which are competing investors, investing in the same stages, but I also meet angel investors, for example, who then can tell me about their portfolio, which companies are raising again, which companies they think I should talk to. Also later stage investors, right, who are either asking me about our portfolio or also talking about opportunities they saw but deemed too early for them, but then share with me. But then, of course, also you work a lot on deals themselves. So let's say you found a cool company, you've met them, you like them, then the real work kind of, in a more traditional sense starts, where you start, pitching it internally to your colleagues. So, of course, every VC fund has its deal flow process, from mentioning it in like a deal flow call to actually then pushing it along the stages towards an investment committee meeting, so an IC meeting. When here at Iris, we prepare then, internal notes. We do a lot of research. We start with our first light due diligence. We gather all the information we have on the company. We do market deep dives. We talk to colleagues who are exposed in that space. We do some reference calls, for example. So you talk to customers or stakeholders in that market. That's also part of the work. And then if you invest, of course, you go into deeper DD and you really start doing the legal work and kind of doing the traditional stuff that you do as an investor. And the rest of the work I'm doing is either covering portfolio companies. You do a lot of, I would say, VC job is also a lot of marketing and sales. So you go to conferences. I actually attended some conferences this year as a speaker as well. So where I talk about our fund, about Iris, but also about what we're doing, what we're looking for. So you're constantly trying to spot good opportunities, but also create like some impact with your brand, either personal brand as an investor, but also for your fund, of course. But good entrepreneurs who are looking for funding think of you when they go out and raise capital. So to sum it up, I would say as a VC, your job is a mix of traditional work as an investor, so very finance stuff. It's some sales, it's some marketing, and it's a lot of human interaction. So as I said, it's a very generalist job, and it requires, I would say, a very generalist profile, especially if you're an early stage VC, where unfortunately with many opportunities I look at also, you can't dive into it too deeply quantitatively because, if you talk to an early stage company at seed or pre-seed stage, they're usually lacking, very deep data points. So it's in the end a lot of generating hypotheses, understanding markets. And hey, what I love about my job is the fact that I'm being paid to learn. So a lot of the time I'm just reading, blogs. I'm reading up on market trends. I'm looking at analysis of markets. So most of the time I'm actually learning something new every day.
That's really interesting, but also I wanted to touch on the human element of things, because you also mentioned how you speak to, late stage investors and how they might send you companies which are too early for them. And building relationships and networks has and seems to be one of the most important things to kind of not only like break into VC, but also accelerate your career and help you find the best investment opportunities. But a lot of people don't know how to get started and don't really know how to go about networking. And you seem to have done it so well. So do you have any advice for someone who wants to kind of develop and grow their network and their brand?
I think the first thing is to just start doing it. Oftentimes people, and me included back in the day, we were scared. We're like, does this person want to talk to me? But people love to talk. People love to give advice. If you want to start networking because you want to break into VC, perhaps you know somebody from your local school, from your uni, who is a VC. You can just reach out to them. Say, hey, I saw on LinkedIn that you went to, my school. You're a VC now. I want to break into this field as well. I want to learn more about it. Can I buy you a coffee and we just chat, for example, right? And most of the time, people will get back to you, especially if there's already like a mutual connection, like you went to the same school or you have mutual friends, for example. The second thing is, be persistent about it, but also don't go into it, I would say, too transactional. So for me, I've never done it with a strict goal of say, okay, I want to meet, at this event now, 5 VCs who could then or maybe offer me an internship at some point. I was just naturally curious about people. I was just excited to meet people, talk to them, and had no clear set goal in mind. And usually you meet somebody and you will not know how this connection will play out. Sometimes maybe, nothing will happen. You see each other and it's kind of like dating in the end, right? But sometimes this leads to one thing to another, right? You might be able to add some value, maybe introduce them to a cool company or to a cool founder. This has helped me a lot to actually stay in touch with people. I would check back in with them. So as I mentioned, I was living in the US, but I made sure to be in Berlin at least once a year. And then I would just come back to Berlin as a student even and meet up with the people who I've met during my internship time. Just check up with them, check back in, grab a beer, grab a coffee, have breakfast, lunch, whatever, and just meet them and tell them what I'm doing with my life, what they're doing, and ask them, hey, so what's happening in Berlin right now? What are the cool trends? Who should I meet? What should I know of? Just because I was very, very curious. And so for me, it never felt like a deed or something I had to do, but it was just part, honestly, in the end, most of the people I've met, I considered friends, to be fair. It was something I enjoyed. I enjoyed socializing, and that was part of it. But you have to start doing it. Kind of, I would say, become less shy, reach out to people. So if anybody listens to this and they want to know more about Iris, about my job, ping me on LinkedIn. I will get back to you.
I definitely think that being curious and paying it forward really goes a long way. I want to ask something a little bit perhaps more sensitive, because I think the dynamics between different VCs are very interesting. You're both competitors, but you're also collaborators. And you mentioned in a previous conversation we had that you're actually best friends with some of the VCs in Germany. So how's that dynamic like, and how do you navigate that?
That's a good one. I would honestly say it's very friendly here in Germany, especially. So in the ecosystem, it's very social, a lot of, happenings, parties, get together. So you meet VCs not only at work-related events, but also you meet them at local bars, at local house parties. So I DJ from time to time, and I was DJing at the house party here in Berlin a few weeks ago at a friend's party who is not even a VC, but in the end, people came who were also VCs. So you meet them also just like you bump into each other, right? And the dynamic is very friendly in general. Obviously, you respect each other. And there is always of course, this barrier of you are open and you're transparent about certain things, but you wouldn't overshare, right? So even if I'm best friends, some VCs here in Germany, and, I've actually just got back from a trip to the south of France with 2 friends of mine who are also VCs, I, of course, then wouldn't just share with them my hottest 3 deals I'm trying to chase and pursue right now. You just don't do that. But no, generally, there's trust, respect for each other. And I would say, especially with the younger generation, just become such a cool industry to break in. But if you look at your own firm, most funds are rather small teams. It's actually, for me, really important to be so close to these people, because if you work at a big consultancy, for example, you have many, many colleagues who are in a mutual age than you. In VC firms, this is rarely the case. And if there's maybe like only 2 or 3 people. So I think kind of venturing out of your own fund, making friends with, colleagues, quote unquote, who are working for other VCs, to me is so important, just because I want to have friends who work in the same industry. And so hence I have to be friends with people who are at competing funds. But no, you're respectful about each other. So, you respect boundaries a bit. You're obviously not oversharing everything. There is some limits, but yeah, there's also trust. There's this joke, right? It's always like, bro, we got to do a deal together, and it never happens, right? We're joking about this a lot in our friend group. So it is, I would say, a very friendly environment. And for me, makes this job so enjoyable.
I wanted to take a step back in your shoes. If you were 18 again, what advice would you give yourself?
Probably don't worry so much. I think this is actually an advice I would give any 18-year-old out there. At least I was always, and I still am, oftentimes, overthinking a lot. Exams are important, grades are important. How about attending one more party, enjoying life? So I would always say, enjoy the ride, don't worry too much. Things happen. I remember I had this conversation. That's actually a good one. So I had this conversation. I must have been 20, 21. I just finished my first internship at a VC firm in Berlin. And I talked to another guy who was a full-time investor. He must have been an associate back in the day. And if he listens to this, he will know which time I mean, because I was worried. I was like, hey, I had this, I would say probably imposter syndrome. I was like, I don't know if I ever be a full-time VC. I don't think I have what it takes. And he said, listen, Jan, don't worry so much about it. Enjoy the ride. You're still so far away from graduating. Enjoy your time in the US, do some cool internships, just follow your passion. If you're passionate about what you're doing, if you're passionate about becoming a VC, you will most definitely become one. He said, well, and I sense your passion. We had a bet going on. It's like, if you become a full-time VC, you will have to buy me dinner. And yeah, so here we are. I had to buy him dinner. I'm a full-time VC now, and it all worked out. So I would tell myself, worry less. Things will work out fine. You have to be able to deal with a no. You will get rejected sometimes. Also, as part of the process. So yeah, worry less, enjoy the ride, and things will work out.
What's the sort of things that you don't like about VC? And, VC is not for everyone. Who do you think it's not for? What sort of things that you thought you'd learn in VC, but you didn't really get exposed to?
That's fun. And actually, I talked about this also at a conference recently, where the title of my talk was "Why You Should Not Be a VC." And for me, the number one reason what I don't like about my job is that you say no a lot of times, right? So you meet founders, and obviously they all hope that you will invest in their companies. But in most time, you will meet a company and you won't invest in them. So you have to reject them. And it is never fun, right? Rejecting somebody, at least for me, I don't enjoy it. So I try to make it transparent. I try to give feedback and be very nice about it, but I don't enjoy it because, nobody likes to be rejected, and hence rejecting somebody, this is still tough for me, even after being in this industry for so long now. Another thing I don't like is you also hear no a lot. So of course, you also, when you want to pursue a deal as a VC, you have to get it past your IC. So you get it through the partnership. You have to convince everybody in the firm. And of course, everybody has a different style of companies they like. And so what I still, of course, don't enjoy is when I'm very excited about a deal. I really want to invest. And then we can't invest for some reason, right? You either hear no from your partners because they don't like the deal, or you will hear no from the founders because they got another term sheet they like more, another fund they like more, who wants to invest. So hearing no, being rejected, once again, don't like it. And I would say, as a VC, as I described earlier, the job, it is somewhat of a team sport. So you have colleagues, you work with them, you analyze things, but oftentimes you're on your own. So I think you really have to have the self-starter mentality, be proactive. And I think for some people, this is something they probably wouldn't enjoy, where you don't get clear instructions from your superiors in a sense where they tell you, well, now you do this, now you do that. But actually, as a VC, you're required to kind of create your own hypotheses, interests in markets, in spaces, which I love. So like I said, I'm very intrinsically motivated about my job. I love what I'm doing. But I think for some people who are still at the beginning of their career, they kind of would miss more instructing when you work I think in a bigger corporate, for example, where I think the work is better defined in a certain degree, where the scope is much better defined, where you also have, I would say, more supervision, and where learnings are transferred more structurally, where actually, if you look at big tech companies, for example, or consultancies, I think what they're doing amazingly is to transfer knowledge from one generation to the next. So they're very much optimizing on making sure next generation of talent that joins is actually learning in a structured way the processes that are needed in that certain business. And in a VC, teams are usually very small, and there's just no time, no resources to do these things properly. So you will have to learn a lot on your own. You will have to dig into things on your own. You have to be a self-starter, really. And I could see that for some people, that might not be the most ideal fit.
It's definitely also very interesting how you mentioned that, although you might not be a founder as a VC, you're inadvertently also very entrepreneurial yourself. Obviously, that must shine through in the projects you see. But I think now it's time for the quick fire round. We're going to ask you a few short questions and you'll have 20 to 30 seconds to answer them. So are you ready?
I think so. Let's go.
All right, I'll kick us off. So if not for Berlin, where else in the world would you want to live? You can't say anywhere in Germany.
No, and I wouldn't. I would say New York City. I've had an amazing time in New York during my internship, and I fell in love with the city. And every time I'm back, I'm just in awe. And yeah, I miss New York, and I could definitely see myself in New York City again.
New York definitely has that special vibe. So, B2B or B2C, and why?
I would say for me, B2B, because I've worked in a B2B startup. I've invested in B2B at my old firm and at IRIS also. I see more B2B, and it's just something I understand much better and where I can add, I would say, more value. So if I had to decide, I would choose B2B.
On that, is there any particular B2B or B2C startup that you're particularly interested in or excited about in your portfolio?
I really like our company, Tailor One, here in Berlin. It's a German-based company, amazing set of founders, very experienced, great space, and I would say one of my favorite companies in our portfolio.
And if someone were to go to Germany for the first time, where would you recommend them to visit?
I would say Munich. I love Munich. It's one of my favorite cities in Germany. You're close to the Alps, you're close to the amazing lakes, you can go hiking. So go to Munich, have an amazing Helles beer, which is my favorite kind of beer, and then go hiking in the Alps.
That sounds very dreamy. And last question, what would you be doing if you weren't a VC? Is a pilot?
I would be a pilot. Yeah. Yeah. I would be a pilot, I would say. Yeah, honestly, this dream never died in me. I still love aviation. I still love flying. If you catch me on a plane, you will most likely see me dreaming, watching outside the window, watching the clouds. So I would be a pilot.
Well, it was amazing chatting with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your incredible journey into VC. And hopefully our listeners will have taken some great gold dust away from this episode.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun. And if anybody out there who has more questions, who just wants to say hi, look me up on LinkedIn or Twitter, and happy to chat with anybody who wants to know more.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Next Gen VC, a podcast from Gen Zs to Gen Zs. If you enjoy our content, do support us by hitting the subscribe button and give us a follow on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram at Next Gen VC Pod for updates on the latest episodes. Are you tired of always hearing about Silicon Valley VCs and not knowing what the greats of European VC are thinking? Well, no more. Head over to theeuropeanvc.com, the go-to place for everything European VC. You'll find podcasts, events, and expert-curated content from all over the EUVC scene. Well, what are you waiting for? Go to theeuropeanvc.com now.